React components can be art, like for real, Mona Lisa art, but most of them are not. Most of the components out there are just ugly, but not yours, because after this video, you will know how to build a beautiful React component, how to name your file and your component correctly. Should you use interfaces or types for props? And how do you structure the logic in your component? So let's jump into code, and we need to create our component first. And therefore we need to create a file. But how do we name this file? It's pretty simple. We use case. No, not the food that everyone is eating in Germany. I'm talking about a naming convention, and you should name your component exactly like that. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, there you go. The reason we use case is not only because it's convention, but also because uppercase letters can lead to problems in case-sensitive systems, like Unix, for example. So let's go into defining our component. We have a couple of options here. We could write everything ourselves, but don't do that. That's ugly. Instead, I strongly encourage you to install this extension if you use VS Code, because then you get snippets and you can actually even build your own snippets. And that's what I've done here. I have a snippet that I can just type in CC and click enter, CC for create component, and I get a perfect starting point. Sure, you could type this every time again, but having a shortcut like that really helps. Okay, cool. But in here, we already see so many opinionated things, like exporting the component directly here and not exporting it here at the bottom, and also choosing a default export. This means that this makes importing components pretty clean, because if you import a component that is not being a default export, then this would theoretically look something like this. But if you use a default export, you can just import it like that. But why are we, for example, using a function declaration? Why not a arrow function? Sure, this is just an opinion, but also it has one reason, because sometimes linters, like DevTools linters, are not good enough to actually understand the name of a arrow function component. So if you have an arrow function component, which would look something like this, you not only cannot defaultly export this one like that, this is just not valid syntax. The second problem is that the name of the component, perfect components, sometimes cannot be inferred from those linters. So if you're using a function declaration, you don't have this problem, and somehow it's prettier. And when it comes to the name of your component, you should definitely use Pascal case. Not because you cannot use anything else, but because it's just a really popular convention. So what about the props? Interfaces or types? What should you use here? You can use both. You usually name props like the name of your component and then props, but also that is of course just a convention. So 3 reasons why you should use interfaces and not types. First, it's extendable. Second, it gives you clearer TypeScript errors. And third, it's just a convention. So you might define your props in here, and then you're just using your props like this. And now you have 2 decisions to make. Either you use object destructuring like I'm using here, or you're just saying props and then can write something like this. I don't know what scan face is. And I have a simple rule for that. If the number of your props is 3 or less, then use object destructuring. So this case here. And if the number of your props is more than 3, then use the prop syntax, because I feel like the header is getting too much overloaded and it's not that easy to read anymore. So let's talk about the body. So the inside of your component, the logic, the JSX that's getting returned. So the first thing in your component should be hooks. And the first hook should be your hook. Like if you have custom hooks you've written or from your auth framework, for example, so you write something like const auth is equal to use auth, just as an example, this would be on the top here. Then on the next hooks layer, you would have your hooks. So you write something like const count, set count, use state, whatever. And after your states, you have your refs. So you write something like use ref, blah, 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 blah. You get the point. Then finally, it's time for the most popular hook. Okay, maybe not. I would say use state is the most popular hook in React, but also pretty popular is use effect, of course. So then you would have your effects with whatever content. So that's the clean starting point with your hooks. Your own hooks, then use state hooks, use ref hooks, and then use effect. Sure, there are more hooks out there and you can sort them in as you want, but I would say that use effect should be the last hooks you are defining here. And then you have helpers or helper functions. So functions that you just need that maybe calculate something or do some logic in your component. And there's one rule of thumb. If the helper function is not dependent of the content of your component, throw it anywhere else, in a utils file or wherever. But if the helper function is actually using your component, like const calculate, count, something like that, I have no idea, then this is a great place in your file. And then after the helper functions, you actually call your event handlers. Anything that you need to handle. Maybe you need to handle a click, or you handle a submit, or whatever. And then it's time for early returns. Let's say you have data that is still loading. Let's say this is not named, this is like page data, and we just return a div like loading. This makes totally sense on the client, but on the server, I would strongly encourage you to take a look at the loading TSX in Next.js or suspend boundaries in general in React. I think that is a great starting point for having loading states in React server components, but in the client component, this early return here would make totally sense. And then you have some last render logic. No, this is not the return. This is like const button name. If loading, then do loading. If not, then do click me, something like that. Because you want that your JSX, the thing that you're returning here at the bottom, is clean AF. And the best way to achieve this is defining the render logic right above. And then we're finally at the JSX, things that you somehow return in here, like saying this is a text, and then you have another div inside, another div. And just a quick tip, don't overuse divs. You don't need a div in a div in a div in a div most of the time. And second tip is just use one style system. Don't mix Tailwind with inline styles with style modules. Just go with one solution or maybe two. And the last tip for your JSX is pretty simple. Just use semantic HTML like section, header, footer, nav, main. So, but what if your component has grown? Like I already said it, tons of divs in here with tons of styles. What if the JSX is like pretty big? You have two options here. First is you comment your JSX. You say something like this is the header region, and then this is the main, this is the footer, whatever component this is and wherever this makes sense. But the better way is to just take a part of your component, copy it and put it in another component and then use it in here. That makes your file cleaner and your JSX better understandable. But what if the logic, the body of your component is just growing when there's so many calculations and so many logic in here? Just write a hook, use perfect component logic, for example, and use it in here for a specific part of your component. That makes the component shorter and it's extracting related logic together into this hook. This is definitely a clean code approach. So congratulations, you just learned how to build a beautiful React component. But basically you just learned how to make it pretty. You didn't learn how to make it actually fast. For that, I have some videos here. Just click them and you will find out how to make your components faster. Thank you for watching this video and have a great day. Bye bye.